Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 1.2 million times worldwide and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage, coming to you from Ewan Country.
In today's episode 335 of the Australian Hiker Podcast, brought to you by Whipper, Australia's pack manufacturers, we're going to go through and talk about land snorkelling. We hope you enjoy. If you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. In early 2025, I came across the term land snorkelling for the first time, and it definitely piqued my curiosity about what it was, because as a term, it's probably one that most hikers aren't familiar with, at least by name, even though they may be familiar with the practice. So in this podcast episode, we're going to look at what land snorkelling is, what defines it, and why this should form part of your hiking practice. So first up, what is land snorkelling? In the early 1990s, two US-based artists defined land snorkelling as taking the time to savour aspects of nature we don't ordinarily see or pay attention to. Land snorkelers wander through nature with no intention of hiking to a destination. One contemplates what we find in nature and explores every possible connection with all parts of our natural world. We open up all our senses to experience the hidden treasures of nature, and we develop our intellect through our senses. We sniff it, touch it, examine it, feel the texture, colour, shape, and that's the general broad overview for what land snorkelling is.
It's a very unusual term, though, isn't it? I mean, to take something that is water-based and put land in the front of it to describe basically taking a little bit more time and a closer look.
And the artist in particular, Clive Aspavig, excuse the pronunciation on that one, he had a diving background. So he related to his experience in snorkelling, where you are really focusing on what you're seeing because you've pretty much got a limited breath hold and you've got to look at what you're seeing, then come back up, go back down again, look at something else. So it does make sense. Most hikers can relate to this concept and to varying degrees may already practice this. And I must admit, after doing a bit more research into this practice, I realised it's something I already do, but there was never a name associated with it at all. When you're doing a designated hike, you typically will have a deadline, whether it's you've got to get to the campground by the end of the day, or you've got someone picking you up, or you're on a multi-week hike and you've got to cover certain distances in certain time. So in that situation, you tend to be focused on your destination and the time frames rather than what you're looking at in particular.
I think that's an interesting one because most of us don't have all the time in the world to explore everything that we would want to explore. And so it is a bit of a tension between spending the kind of appropriate, maybe, amount of time and getting on with almost the task.
Alternatively, you may have different interests. So I know a lot of people want to climb to the top of mountains to see the panoramic vistas. And in that situation, you're looking at a broad landscape rather than the fine detail. The views from the mountaintops, the sunrises and sunsets, the big rock formations, rather than the views at your feet. Now, when Jill and I walked the Overland Track in 2017, we took a side trip to an area called the Acropolis and Parthenon. But within 5 minutes of leaving our hut, we came across an area of mosses and lichens, of which I have a particular interest in. At best would have been probably 50 square metres. And I could have very easily spent the entire day just taking photos in this one particular area without moving very far.
Yeah, well, if I had a camera too, I probably would have been able to spend that amount of time. But watching someone else do it, it's not as much fun, Tim.
No. And if you go to the advice article for this podcast on the Australian Hiker website, and I'll put the link in the show notes to this, there's a whole series of photos that I've taken with a macro lens. And for those of you not familiar with photography, this is for looking at fine detail close up. And some of these photos I've spent 20 minutes, half an hour.
I know.
Taking different photos and getting really into the fine detail of things. Now, one of the things I find, particularly when I am doing a photography hike, and I've got a macro lens rather than just a stock standard phone or a stock standard lens on my camera, it really does force me to look nice and close to the detail. So I find that by having my macro lens, yes, I can take other photos with it, but it's not what it's aimed at. It's aimed at doing the close-up stuff. And that forces me into the situation where I am looking at the fine detail. Now, some of the images that I've provided the link to, there's an octopus stinkhorn fungi. It's the only one I've ever seen in the last 10 years. And it was just, does stand out. It's bright red in a green grassy environment, so it did sort of show up quite easily. And it's got the name of stinkhorn, so it does smell. But I certainly noticed the appearance before I noticed the smell of this. And it's the sort of thing that had I been looking at the larger landscape, I would not have picked this up. So what defines land snorkeling? As a generalization, you're focused on the fine detail rather than the broad landscape and where you are going. And in doing so, your senses are engaged. You're not just looking at what's there, but you're touching things. Now, not always the best to touch things if you're not sure what they are, or you don't touch snakes. But you might certainly go for a look at them. In the case of that stinkhorn fungi, it does smell, and it certainly stays with you. And the reason it smells is it uses flies and insects, carrion type insects, to pollinate. So it encourages them in with the smell. Whipper is an Australian designer and manufacturer of ultralight packs based in the Blue Mountains town of Katoomba, and manufactures the best purpose-built performance packs for use in hiking, mountaineering, climbing and canyoning. Leveraging Australian design and manufacturing experience built up since 1981, Whipper uses the most advanced materials available with a minimalist approach that ensures every element serves a purpose. In doing so, they strip away the unnecessary to focus on what truly matters, which is functionality, durability, comfort and performance, to create packs that, in Whipper's words, are lighter, stronger and better. So if you want to experience your ultimate hiking adventure, then get yourself a Whipper Ultralight Performance Pack designed and built in Katoomba, Australia. If you do the same walk on a different day or at different times of the same day, you'll see different things and you'll see it from a different perspective. So the prevailing weather and the light and shadow will impact on the area or what you're looking at. Your curiosity is engaged, so rather than just engaging your senses, you're also engaging your brain. So looking at the environment down to the fine detail and trying to work out why the thing you're looking at is the way it is. If I've got internet access or on trail have offline access to some of my apps, I can use it to try and identify what I'm actually looking at. If not, I'll typically tend to take photos, and I'll take enough photos from different angles that if I get back home, I can say, well, I know this is a fungi, but I'm not sure what it is. And I can just do red fungi that smell, and that'll probably give me an indication of what I'm looking at. And in the case of the octopus stinkhorn, I did have a fungi app that was usable offline, and I was able to do it on the spot to find out what it was.
There's something in here about the deliberateness of taking a pretty professional camera and a macro lens and looking for particular things, looking for something of interest to take a photo of, or in your case, to spend 30 minutes looking at through the lens of your camera, versus not having that but still doing the same thing. And I think sometimes when you've got a camera in your hand, you kind of want to make a point of having it, so you are actually looking, I think, harder than probably you would if you didn't have the camera. So it is about that, quite deliberateness, not necessarily having a camera in your hand.
For those of you that have been listening to this podcast, it may actually ring some bells in relation to a practice called forest bathing. And this is a Japanese practice, and there are a lot of similarities, but there probably are a couple of differences as well. So, as the name suggests, forest bathing is about walking through forests, whatever the forest happens to look like, whereas land snorkeling can be a desert, it can be an open grassland, it can be a forest. It's not limited just to forests themselves. To me, that's probably a fairly minor difference. I think the other thing with forest bathing as well is forest bathing is about mindfulness and stress relief. And I find personally that when I go into a mindfulness state, my focus shifts on to the broader environment and away from the fine detail.
Yeah, I think for me it's about actually being there and just it's about absorbing the vibe of the thing.
Yeah. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. And it is almost a bit of splitting hairs between the difference between the two. But the other thing with forest bathing, they recommend you get rid of all the electronics as well. But in the case of land snorkeling, I've normally got a camera attached to my hand and I'm taking a record of it. I think the other thing with it as well is I do tend to get a bit of stress release from hiking in general, but that's really a byproduct rather than a goal. Whereas forest bathing, you're there for stress relief, you're there for mindfulness. So it really is a fine detail, but the difference between the two. But at least from my perspective, there is a difference.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think most people, maybe it's a generalisation, are there to be there, and they certainly like the vistas. We see very few people really exploring in great detail as opposed to walking through. And, you can't always take your time, as we said before, but, maybe take a little bit more time to get in close and to have a look at what you might be missing.
Just to wrap this up, I enjoy quite a wide range of hiking experiences. I love solo hiking. I love hiking with Jill. I love the expansive...
I'm glad you like hiking with me.
Yeah. I love the expansive landscape views, but also enjoy the fine details. So much so that I drive Jill insane as I lag behind for the 20th time that day, looking at some little detail and taking photos that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily notice.
And I think sometimes I get into it as well because I often walk ahead and I point things out. So I'm actually encouraging him to go and have a look and take a photo.
I must admit, it is good to finally have a name to this hiking practice because this is pretty much something I've been doing for many years but never knew what it was called. As I mentioned previously, I will head out bush with my bulky SLR camera and macro lens that weigh just under 2 kilos with no destination in mind. So we're fairly close to bushland, not far from home, and there's some hiking that's on Management Road, and I enjoy being there, enjoy doing it, but it's not a spectacular hiking trail in a lot of instances. But when I've got a macro lens on an SLR camera, I'm not looking at the broad landscape. I am looking at the fine detail. I'm looking at the little stuff, not trying to cover distances, more just to see what I can find. And that just changes my whole concept of what I've been doing and what I'm looking at.
Yeah, but I think also you're trying to justify the fact that you're carrying that extra weight. So, if you didn't take any, focused, detailed pictures, you'd go home and think, oh, I carried that for nothing.
I must admit, I'm looking at changing over the next year away from using my compact digital camera to using just my phone to take all my photos. But I still think that there's nothing like a good quality SLR camera and a decent lens. But this is not a camera at 2 kilos I'm going to be carrying on my hikes. It really is a tool for a specific activity and one that I enjoy. So if you haven't tried land snorkeling already, give it a go. It will bring new life to hiking trails that you may not have noticed previously. That's all for this podcast episode, brought to you by Whipper, Australia's pack manufacturer. We hope you've enjoyed. Bye for now.
And bye from me.